8 stratostats were tested in the USSR, and only the first flight was relatively successful. None of the balloonists were killed, and the flying apparatus coped with its tasks. The catastrophe of Wisioner 1 did not stop Stalin. He ordered to continue working on the testing of similar balloons. Before you watch this video, I'm going to ask you to support my channel with a thumbs up. It won't cost you anything, but it means a lot to me and my channel. Thank you. As Mikhail Maslov wrote in his book The Lost Victories of the Soviet Aviation, at first the project of this blimp was developed by the Bureau of Air Technology of the Leningrad Osovyachem and was headed by Andrei Vasenko, one of the 3 future aeronauts of this stratosphere. The manufacturing of the stratosphere balloon began in 1932. The apparatus shell had a volume exceeding 22,000 cubic meters when filled. The shell was welded and the cabin was equipped with 4 hermetic portholes. The Osovyachem took off on January 30, 1934, from the site near Moscow, village Koncevo. The crew included Commander Pavel Fedosenko, flight engineer Andrei Vasenko, and research assistant Ilya Usiskin. The stratostat was to maintain uninterrupted radio communication with the ground. It had the call sign Sirius. The flight was widely covered in the Soviet media. The Comintern radio station broadcast messages about it for several hours, and Osovyachem constantly received congratulatory radiograms. The balloonists themselves were encouraged, radioing to the ground with requests to name the stratostat after Stalin. After 2.5 hours, the stratosphere balloon reached an altitude of 20.6 kilometers, the second world record, the first, 19-kilometer, with the stratosphere balloon USSR 1. Then there were radio reports that the stratostats were conducting scientific observations and experiments. However, at noon communication was lost. According to the edition Gazeta.ru, around 1 o'clock a certain Gomel amateur radio operator caught a radiogram of balloonists, which reported that the stratosphere balloon had iced up and was falling down. The last words of the radio operator were, "I'm coming to an end, the impact is coming soon." According to the official version and interviews with witnesses of the accident, residents of the Mordovian village of Potizostrog, the gondola of the balloon hit the ground at 5 p.m. All 3 balloonists were killed. Causes of the crash. The official report on the causes of the tragedy of the Osovyachem 1, published in the Soviet press, states that the crash of the stratostat was due to its progressively increasing speed during descent, which obviously resulted in parts of the slings breaking and the whole system becoming unbalanced. All this provoked the separation of the gondola from the shell and its impact on the ground. According to Dmitry Sobolev, researcher at the Institute of the History of Science and Technology of the Russian Academy of Sciences, an expert in the use of stratostats, the cause of the crash might have been the solar radiation affecting the rubber Osovyachem 1. The shell lost its seal and began to leak hydrogen. As experts later found, if the stratosphere balloon had stopped at a height of 21 kilometers, perhaps the tragedy would not have happened. It was the optimum altitude limit for this kind of apparatus. Stalin had no intention of stopping. The urns with ashes to be buried in the Kremlin wall were carried not only by Joseph Stalin, but also by Vyacheslav Molotov and Klim Voroshilov. Obituaries about the heroes of the stratosphere were published by all Soviet newspapers, and the dead were posthumously awarded the Orders of Lenin. Domestic publicist Igor Pikolov, author of a number of complimentary books about Joseph Stalin, believes that the head of state's personal participation in the funeral of the dead stratostat testers is one of the proofs that Stalin did not seek to hide the shortcomings of certain Soviet technical projects. However, Pikolov's opponents are convinced that this is not the case. The Soviet press covered the preparations for the flight in great detail, and the foreign press followed it closely. Accordingly, it was impossible not to talk about the consequences of the Osovyachem 1 test and not to mention the reasons for its tragic finale. In addition, as wrote in his scientific paper Flights to the Stratosphere in the USSR in the 30s, PhD Yuri Druzinin and Dmitry Sobolev, Stalin had reason to believe the use of such balloons promising. In September 1933, stratosphere balloon USSR 1 set a 19-kilometer world record climb and successfully landed on the ground. However, further tests of such balloons in Stalin's lifetime were less successful. USSR 2 in 1934 crashed before it was lifted off the ground. The shell burned out. USSR 1 bis in 1935 the shell was damaged during descent and 2 testers had to jump with parachutes. During the emergency descent of Soyuz 3 in 1937, 3 testers were wounded, and as a result of the falling of the BBA-1 substatal in 1938, 4 balloonists were killed. In 1940, during takeoff of the Stratostat Osoaviachem 2, the nacelle separated from the shell and fell to the ground. 2 pilots were bruised. The last Soviet Volga Stratostat was launched in 1962. One of the 2 balloonists died during the catapult from 25 kilometers altitude. His spacesuit depressurized, temperature overboard reached -65 degrees. I thank you for watching. Your support is very important to me. Your comments and thumbs up motivate me to release new videos on interesting topics. Subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the new videos.